What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy. Back with Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 decklist of the Commander in front of us on my quest to brew the magic. Well, you know the motto, baby. It's ABB, always be brewing, and that's what we're back to do today. The decklist is going to be down in the description for you below. As well as I'd really appreciate it if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, consider checking out those links in the description. But today, we're continuing through Aether Drift and talking about one of really the only commanders we know from Muraganda. We talked about Mimeoplasm's new card yesterday or a day or two ago. Today we're going to talk about the old one, the Mimeoplasm, a Sultai Ooze that says as it enters, we can exile 2 creature cards from any graveyards. If we do, it becomes a copy of one of them with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the power of the other card. So Mimeoplasm, right, very interesting in what it does, right? It comes in, wants you to kind of terraform your graveyard or maybe take advantage of what your opponents have in their graveyard and have it come in and be a real threat. So as we look into what our targets are going to be, I think we're going to want to try to pick the right things to copy. And then, since we're going to be self-milling ourselves, right, we're going to be wanting to get certain creature cards into our graveyard. We also want to play ways to play things back out of the graveyard, because the truth is we're going to end up milling things that we don't want to copy with Mimeoplasm, spells, artifacts, enchantments, or other creatures maybe. So we need to find ways to kind of get them back out if that's the case. But as far as targets go, like I think there's a lot of way to look at what Mimeoplasm could want to target. Remember that here on the show, we do play ourselves on a budget, meaning that we had to kind of pick and choose our targets, but I still think we found some really aggressive or very well-placed ones. You have things like Consuming Aberration, which is power and toughness equal to the number of cards in our opponent's graveyards, and then whenever we cast a spell, they get to mill some more. This is a very interesting thing, and it could be a great copy for Mimeoplasm, either to become a copy of or be a target at the time. Remember that when a creature is a star, the star is always going to be calculated, even when it's in another zone, like your hand or in the graveyard. So for something like it or Cruel Somnophage, if we exile it at the time, it will be able to get counters at the time equal to its star. So Somnophage's star is equal to the number of creature cards in all graveyards. Again, pretty helpful for us, right? Because then we can do that. The other really nice thing about Somnophage and Aberration is if Mimeoplasm becomes a copy of them, then its power's always growing, and you have counters on top of it, right? It's a 0/0 that becomes a copy of that thing and then gets counters on it. But the truth is, like, when it becomes a copy of the thing, right? Then you have that nice base power and toughness there, and then you have that, because it doesn't say that it becomes a 0/0. It just becomes a copy of one of those cards. So it takes whatever it is, and that star's a nice base. Demolisher Spawn isn't a bad idea. Whenever it attacks, if there's 4 or more cards among card types in our graveyard, other attacking creatures get +4/+4 until end of turn. I look at this as a great recursion target. Like if we don't want to get rid of it with Mimeoplasm, this could be a nice piece alongside it to make sure that we get in for some good effort. Of course, anything we can give Mimeoplasm to give it any sort of protection is great, and you have something fun like Impervious Great Worm with Indestructible, is helping it from a little bit of the removal. Of course, although our exile removal is going to be more prevalent, that's where I think something like Coma World Eater seems a lot more fun, giving it Ward 4 and Trample. Durad gets +1/+1 for each creature card in our graveyard, and we can sack another creature to have each opponent lose life equal to its power. So this is just an interesting ability. I think more often than not, we're going to be using that second ability to make sure creatures hit our graveyard so they can be used for different abilities or what have you. I just think Durad's a nice base for a copy if we need it to be, and if it's out alongside Mimeoplasm, hopefully we can sacrifice some creatures for some value, if people try to remove them. Lord of Distinction's a star with stars number of cards in all graveyards. Now that's a very useful base to copy. We just wish it had some sort of evasion on it, but not too bad. Shieldred having Swamp Walk. Beginning of our upkeep, we return a creature card from our graveyard back to the battlefield. In the beginning of each of our opponent's upkeep, they have to sack a creature. Again, not a bad choice, either for its power and toughness or its abilities, but probably one of our favorite targets is Skittles, right? Skittles is a 4/4 flyer with Infect. For a black, it can get haste, and for 2 black, it can regenerate itself. So it effectively has a way to get around destruction The problem becomes single target removal, and that's still probably going to be the fate of Mimeoplasm as a problem, but we're trying to mitigate as many of those problems as we can in choosing our target. Tarion just seems like a great one for something to put counters, exile it and put 9 counters on it. The Mind Scanner just seems like a ton of fun, can't be blocked, and you get to mill people out. Just feels like a great creature either alongside the Mimeoplasm or something for it to copy. Same thing with Toxrill. I think Toxrill would be a great thing for Mimeoplasm to become a copy of, spreading out those -1/-1 counters, those slime counters, and trying to just corrode away our opponent's board and try to keep them down as they try to assault and take out our targets. Tyrannix Rex could be either a great thing for counters or a great line: Ward 4, Toxic 4, Haste, Trample. I mean, it's gonna make Mimeoplasm a real threat and be helpful there. Underrealm Lich lets us pay 4 life to tap it, which is huge, and give it indestructible. So that's another way to protect, right? Our Mimeoplasm against destruction. The other thing I like about Underrealm Lich is if we would draw a card instead, we can look at the top 3, put 1 into our hand and the rest into the graveyard. Good way to get that self-mill going. And then, of course, since we care about putting counters on thing, of course, we're looking at something like Yargle Multani for 18 counters in the Mimeoplasm to just be, well, a meme, but just be another effective way to really hurt our opponents when we can eventually get Mimeoplasm into combat. But I think the way our deck functions is milling ourselves to get those key creatures into the graveyard. There's a lot of ways to do it. Hermidru just got that great reprint in Innistrad Remastered. Lets us reveal from the top till we hit a basic land and put all the other cards into our graveyard. Good way to get cards in there. Skull Prophet can either be a mana dork or mill us 2 cards. Urborg Lurgoyf is a star +1, where star is the number of creature cards in our graveyard. And when it comes in, we can kick it twice for either of the 2 mana, and it can mill up to 6 cards when it comes in. So for 4 mana, we can basically mill 6 and then have it come in as potentially a nice body. And again, it's a pretty inexpensive way to mill some cards and get some in the graveyard. But we also have a way to kind of shape what's in our graveyard with things like Buried Alive and Unmarked Grave to choose what we want to go in the graveyard. Now, of course, Unmarked Grave can't get anything non-legendary, but Buried Alive feels like probably one of the best cards in our deck because we can go get 3 creatures of our choice, throw them into our graveyard, and now the Mimeoplasm has exactly what targets we want it to have. Life from the Loam is going to let us play with those dredge mechanics. Whenever we draw a card, we can mill 3 instead and return it from our graveyard back to our hand. The nice thing about Life from the Loam is that you do not actually have to return any land cards from your graveyard back to your hand in order to cast it. So if your worst case scenario, you just need it in your graveyard, you can pay 2 mana, put it in your graveyard, and then it's there to dredge. Although, with how much we're milling, we will eventually run into lands in our graveyard that Life from the Loam can get back. And get back for us. But we also have something like Head Shredder that says whenever one of our lands are put into our graveyard from our library, we get to bring them back in tap. This is really nice because then you don't have to worry about them losing out on them, and it's actually even better because then if we're really trying to mill hard, we kind of get to ramp while we're doing it. Grizzly Salvage, let's just look at the top 5, put a creature or land from among them, put the into our hand and the rest into the graveyard. And then Ripples of Undeath is going to mill us 3 cards every turn, but we get the option to pay a mana and 3 life to get one of those cards back. I like Ripples a ton, especially if it mills something you really wanted, especially a spell or a key creature or what have you. You get to pay 1 in that 3 life, bring it back, and then you're not worried about trying to recur it some other way right out of your graveyard. I've always liked Matt Zalantli a ton. You get to draw a card and then discard a card. This is really nice because inevitably we're going to have creatures we want to copy get stuck in our hand, or maybe we have them bounce back to our hand or something like that. The truth is, we may not really want to cast them, but we really want them in our graveyard. This lets us pitch them there, and then Matt Zalantli, once we have 4 more permanent types in our graveyard, we can flip it over into a really nice land that's going to tap for some mana. And then same on Sultai Ascendancy is going to let us Surveil 2 at the beginning of our upkeep. So remember, with Surveil, you can either put them in your graveyard or put them back on top. That's really nice because then we can still form our draws a little bit while still, right, getting the key cards we want into the graveyard. But I think the last real bastion for taking what I think is a good strategy and making it even better is trying to take advantage of the fact that we're going to have a graveyard full of things that we really want to get back. And so we kind of have to think about that, right? Like, we can't cast Mimeoplasm every turn, right? And once Mimeoplasm's out, we want Mimeoplasm to stay out. So the answer becomes, how do we take advantage of all this stuff in our graveyard? Well, there's a lot of ways to do it. You have traditional recursion or reanimate, right? Just getting a creature back. Living Death is a fun one. If our board gets wiped, we can potentially get all of our creatures out of our graveyard back to the battlefield. I like Muldrotha for a deck like this, just allowing us to play those permanent cards and lands from our graveyard, allowing us to maybe cast some of the creatures that hit our graveyard or the enchantments or artifacts. There's a lot of upside to Muldrotha, especially if we really milled ourselves hard and there's a lot sitting in our graveyard. Victimize and Animate Dead, both being able to get creatures back from our graveyard. And then Squirming Emergence is great because it can get any non-land permanent with mana value less than or equal to the number of permanents in our graveyard back. So it can get artifacts or enchantments back if we need it to. We're not playing a ton of Planeswalkers in the deck, so that could be an option if you're playing them, but we're not. We're not trying to go too hard on Delirium, as that style. We don't really need to do that, unlike other graveyard decks. But I think what's going to happen more often than not is we're going to have a ton of creature cards in our graveyard, and by a ton I mean 4 or 5 like really hard-hitting creatures, and we're going to want to get at least one of them back, and the hope is that we have some way to get it back if we can't exile it with Mimeoplasm. But I've said it before in the show, and I'll say it again. No deck's ever complete. This is my version 1.0 shot at Mimeoplasm, and I think there's a lot to learn in testing, which is mainly do we have enough or too much self-mill? Galarb was my idea here as a way to let you just surveil every turn, and you can actually play things off the top. It seems nice being able to play lands and cast spells with mana value 4 or greater off the top. Seems really helpful, especially if you want to get a key thing onto the board. Something like Lazav, I think makes a ton of sense. Being able to copy something in your graveyard without having to exile it feels nice, especially since Mimeoplasm has to exile the things that it's looking for. I think that's what's nice about these styles of abilities, and we're playing 1 or 2 in the deck already, but I guess my thought is, do I need more of them? Do I want more of these styles of abilities? And then Gutter Grime is a card that I went back and forth on, honestly, multiple times because I really like the card. I was just trying to figure out, do I have the slot for it? It says whenever a non-token creature we control dies, we put a slime counter on it and then make an ooze that's equal to the number of slime counters on it. Again, I really like it. I really like this card. I just wasn't sure where to put it, and I think it's still worth the slot. It would just come down to what is it for. But I think if I'm looking the most in testing, it's the things like Lazav. How do I take advantage of my own graveyard without having to exile it and getting to really, really, really kind of vibe on that position. But let's do what we love to do on the show the most. Let's get into our playtest. Remember, the goal of our playtest on the channel is not to find magical Christmas land. It's not to determine what our best plays are. It's to get ourselves into some game situations on the starting turns, build our board, and understand how our deck's going to function. Here we're keeping a 3-lander with Lord of Extinction. There's the Sultai Ascendancy to get us started. We have a Rampant Gargantua, +10/+10 for each player who lost the game, a very interesting ability. And then whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we can mill that many cards and put any number of lands from among them on the battlefield tapped. So, right, a good way to get stuff back. And then Kiora, when Kiora enters, we draw 2 and pitch 2, and then whenever she attacks, if there's 7 or more cards in our graveyard, we get to make that big 8/8 legendary octopus. Again, not a bad start. I think we've got some nice things to do as we get ourselves towards turn 3. It's just going to be doing that. So I guess now that I drew a 3rd land, the question is, do I want to try to pitch this Dakmor Salvage to something to try to get some of the dredge game plan started, or do I think that this Kiora, Sultai Ascendancy game plan is good enough? I think we don't have to make the decision. I think we'll wait. We'll kind of see what we get as we progress through our turn. Right, so nothing again here on turn 2. We got Victimized there. So I think I'm targeting either Kiora or the Ascendancy next turn. My thought with the Kiora is then I can pitch something like this in the Gargantua and get them into the graveyard, right? And have them accessible, right? Ready to go for us when we eventually want to get there. Well, turn 3, we draw the Aberration, which is another great thing to try to copy. So I think I like Kiora here. This is going to let me draw 2. We see land plus Toxrill. And Toxrill, another great creature I'd love to get in the graveyard. So I think it's just Toxrill, maybe plus Aberration. Well, I like Aberration a ton. It might end up being just helpful to have as another threat. I think what we have to think about sometimes with Mimeoplasm is, like, if we're going all into Mimeoplasm, it's just going to be very easy to get rid of. I think things like Lord of Extinction and Consuming Aberration are nice creatures to have alongside it as threats that our opponents have to deal with. So I think we'll go with the... Aberration is just creatures. All cards, then it lets us mill. I'll mill the Aberration. Let's pitch the Aberration. That way the Extinction, sorry. That way we have another good target. And so now here on turn 4, we see the Great Worm again. Right, would have been great with with to pitch last turn, but that's okay. 4 mana here. I mean, I'm just thinking the Sultai Ascendancy. I don't really. I mean, I guess I could get the Gargantua down, right? I could get the Gargantua wouldn't be bad, right? As a way to set up an attacker for next turn. Kiora can attack this turn. We're just not getting her bonus, so I think we're just kind of sitting tight. Maybe we can bluff if we have some removal here on turn 5. We are in Mimeoplasm territory, so we could, go for the Extinction and the Toxrill. I guess it just depends on how much our opponents have been using. Kind of like the idea of going for something like the Aberration this turn. But I could see the argument of victimizing, to these 2 back. Remember that Victimize lets you sacrifice 1 creature to get 2 back. I mean, we could just straight up get Toxrill and Lord of Extinction back this turn for some real value, right? Because those are going to be 2 huge creatures on turn 5 for our opponents to deal with. I mean, that doesn't seem like a bad line either. And then seeing if maybe we can take advantage of them, maybe get them, killed and put in the graveyard, and then do the Mimeoplasm. But the truth is, we're just trying to admit some sort of value onto the board right before we get Mimeoplasm in. Neither of them can attack. Kiora can attack, but I don't know that we really want it to. We could, though. It would get another card in our graveyard, but I think at the moment this is going to present a huge threat. This is at least a 2/2, and then Toxrill, right, is going to start clearing that board, right, for our opponents, and then of course we're going to start getting those slugs to amass the board for us. Here was 6 mana. I feel like I got to get the Ascendancy down. We got to get to 7, I think, to really help us out with Kiora, because this is just going to help us start churning through our opponent's board. The question is just going to be, how do we get our own? So I think we play the Ascendancy. I would love a way to pitch that Salvage or that Great Worm. I just don't have one at the moment. We could sack a Slug, probably to draw a card. I'm sure we have one at this point, so that adds us more options. But I think we just keep forcing these guys in, attacking. They're real threats. We'll go to the start of our next turn. We get to Surveil 2, draw it, and there's Likeness Looter, another one of our copiers. X and copy something in our graveyard. I like the Looter. I think we can dump Drod just to start filling our graveyard. I guess we could also, dump the Likeness Looter to fill our graveyard. But again, I would love a way to just have any way to discard, right, from my hand, because I think it'd be great to get a couple more of these creatures back into our graveyard. We could Mimeoplasm this turn, pitch the Gargantua, and make it equal to something like Drod, I guess. I'm not entirely sure. I feel like our creatures in our graveyard. So I think it comes down to, does our opponent wipe the board? And if they do, I feel like this is the perfect Mimeoplasm turn. Otherwise, I just feel like we continue setting things up like Consuming Aberration, just building our boards that once our opponents deal with the board, then we're in the perfect Mimeoplasm. I guess the other thing to remember here is that our opponents could have something in their graveyard we really want. Maybe we exile it and the Gargantua and make it a copy. There's a lot of points here, but the point is, we're really going to be taking advantage of some heavier threats here. And although we didn't see the Mimeoplasm, I think sometimes that's okay for our game plan. Because then if somebody wipes this board without exiling it, now they're all back in the graveyard and ready to go for the Mimeoplasm, and then we can take real advantage, right? I think that has to be something you think about in the back of your mind for a deck like this. But let's get into playtest number 2, keeping a 3-lander with Hedge Shredder. Rampant Growth, unmarked grave member, go get a non-legendary of your choice and put it in, and Animate Dead. That's a fun combo right there. Being able to throw something you want in your graveyard, be able to go get it. Turn 1, we also draw Farseek. All right, so we are set on lands. The question is just going to be, how do we fill our graveyard to do it? So I want to get a land here, right? Because I'd ideally like to start getting Hedge Shredder down. This can go get me my Triome. This can get anything. I mean, my colors seem pretty good. We'll just go get the Triome for the purposes of... Do I not have a... Oh, I don't have a Zagoth Triome in there. I thought I did. Well, goes to show you that it makes sense to pay attention. I really thought I put the Zagoth Triome in here. Oh, well. There's still some great options. I think it'll be one of our duels. I guess we'll go for Sunken Hollow. And then turn 4. All right, so we see the Demolisher spawn, not bad. So we could go ahead and load our graveyard up a little bit, but I kind of like the idea of just getting the Hedge Shredder in. That way next turn it can attack once we play a creature. And we don't have a creature to play. So I guess that would probably make some sense. We could do the route, we could do the fun of Unmarked Grave plus Animate Dead. So if we do this, we can go get any non-legendary creature, throw it in our graveyard, and we get to bring it back with the Animate Dead. And then remember, if somebody gets rid of that creature or Animate Dead, it just goes right back in the graveyard. So the question is, what do we go get? I mean, my thought is something fun like Impervious Great Worm, but obviously we don't have to do that. Obviously, I would love something like Toxrill, right, to start hurting our opponent's board, right? But remember, it can't be legendary, the creature that we go get. I love the idea of something like I do have a couple oozes in the deck that just make like tokens. My thought here was then there's good ways to get body on board. Maybe we'll do something like that. It's going to come in and make an ooze. So that is attached to the enemy dead. I'll crew the Hedge Shredder with it, and then attack with Hedge Shredder this turn. Whenever it attacks, we want to mill too, because we want to get things in there. Remember, we get that island back. And then at the end step, each of these oozes gets a counter. I really like Biogenic Ooze. It may not be the sexiest ooze in the world, but I like it because it adds value to the board. So now we come to our next turn. I've got Coma in the graveyard, a great thing for it to become a copy of, because then you get that word for. I just need one more thing, right? I mean, the spawn seems great because it gets to attack this turn, right? And it gives anything attacking with it +4/+4. So I think I'll crew this with the ooze token. And then, Demolisher Spawn can attack. So it's a 7/7. The Hedge Shredder be a 9/9. It doesn't get trample, unfortunately, and then the Biogenic Ooze would be a 7/7. We're going to mill the 2. Obviously, we have no reason not to. There's the Great Worm and the Cure in our graveyard. So now we got some great targets, right? We got some great. Put counters on that. Become a copy of Coma. Seems like a great one. On our end step, those oozes get just a couple more counters. And then my thought here is, play the Rogue's Passage, go 5 into Mimeoplasm this turn. Like I said, I'm thinking counters equal to the Great Worm. Well, I'm trying to decide, do I think Indestructible's better, or do I think the Ward 4 is better? You know what I mean? Which do we think makes more sense? Because those are kind of the best of the best that we have. If I choose the Great Worm, it becomes a huge thing with Indestructible. We just don't have any way to give it trample. But it'll go to counter at the end of the turn with Biogenic Ooze. Or we have it become a copy of something like Coma that has Ward 4, which I feel like, at least in Commander, you are a lot more likely to see Exile-based removal than you are Destruction. And most of the time, they're single, right? We're still dealing with single target removal. It's just a board wipe, right? My gut still tells me Coma makes sense because you get all those coils once it starts attacking, and I like the Ward 4. So I think we'll just have it come in with those counters. And I don't have any way to give it haste, which is fine. Again, crew here with the ooze, mill 2 on attack. We get that Exotic Orchard back. And then it gets another one, an end step with the Biogenic Ooze. And then now this turn, if no one's dealt with it, it's now a huge attacker. It has trample, remember, because Coma gives it trample. And now, I mean, someone's got to really have a way to stop the Mimeoplasm. Otherwise, it's just going to ram through and take somebody out this turn. And then we're just building our board right with these other ones. I like that. Again, I know, a little Christmas landy, but the truth is, these are the things we need to see in the playtesting and understand what are our favorite targets, right? How do we target the right things? Here we're keeping a 4-lander with Life from the Loam Wonder, a card that's in our graveyard. All of our creatures have flying and Toxrill. So again, a way to discard would be great, and we go right into it with Matt Lazanti, a great way to start discarding these creatures to get them in the graveyard. Turn 3, we draw Titanith Rex. My thought here is either you put 11 counters on something, or you become right at 11/11 with trample. Here we'll play the Matsalani draw, and I'll pitch that Toxrill. Toxrill seems like something that I want to become a copy of. But I guess now that we have Titanoth Rex and Tyranids Rex, I mean, both of those aren't bad things. I guess we'll go with the Titanoth Rex first. Because there's still a world where I might want to hardcast Toxrill, right? Like, there's no point in dumping it until we feel like for sure that we're not going to play it. Turn 4, I can Grizzly Salvage. Let's see, reveal the top 5. See what creatures or lands we have. Ooh, Tarian's great. That's another thing we can target to copy. Creature or land, huh? I guess we'll take the land. So we get tight. We get Tyrannix Rex in there. Life from the Loam could get me this forest back, but my thought there is then it lets me dredge, right, on a future turn. Tap Matlazanti to draw. We'll pitch Tyrannix Rex. And then now we're in great shape. Yeah, had we left the land in actually, we could have flipped Matlazanti over. No, we're one off. Yeah, we're one more type off. But it's something we can do in the future. This next turn, I think we take Life from the Loam back on our draw step in mill 3. So there's Brawn. Brawn's very similar to Wonder, except it gives Trample, as long as we control a forest. So that's Creature, Enchantment, Land. So we're just one type off of being able to flip Matlazanti over, but we're still amassing our portions of creatures here in the graveyard. Let's see what Matlazanti has for us. I think we can pitch Wonder now. Right, give that flying. I love the idea of just like double kicking the Lurgoyf here and just going forward and just going 6 deep. Again, just trying to fill the graveyard even more. 3. Here's Shieldred, a great choice for the target. Somnophage isn't a bad target either. Now we're just filling our graveyard at great speed. And so we come back to our turn. Now might be the turn to go ahead and dump Mimeoplasm in. This is nice because we could pitch the Head Shredder to be able to flip Matlazanti over. I just don't have any way to get it back, and I really like Head Shredder to be able to get the lands back. But the truth is, we may just be good with the amount that we have in our hand. So I think let's draw and discard it for the purposes of Matlazanti. That way we can flip it next turn. And I think we just play Mimeoplasm here, right? We've got lots of creatures in our graveyard. I love the idea of Shieldred to start hurting our opponents. I love the idea of Tyrannix Rex. Again, it's got Ward 4. I feel like it's a great thing to kind of present to our opponents. And then I'm kind of thinking Somnophage for the counters. Right now it's 1. It's only 4 at the moment. So no, it's definitely Titanoth Rex, right? So I'm thinking become a copy of Tyrannix Rex, put 11 counters on it. So now it's got Ward 4. I mean, really all that's left is mass removal, right? Or paying that Ward 4. It's got Ward, right? It's got Trample, Haste, so it's going to attack this turn. It's a 19/19, and it just deals some damage. You know, maybe the Lurgoyf can attack on future turns. Now this turn, we can flip Matlazanti over for 4 mana. It does tap to do it, but I feel like it's a great idea because then it turns into a land that starts tapping for a ton of mana. Where X is the number of permanent cards in our graveyard. And so we paid 4 to do that. I think we'll just like Life from the Loam to set up. So we don't need all 3 of them. I thought there's just setting up another dredge. And then just take our attacks this turn. Again, we paid 4 for that, so it's only 3 left. I mean, we don't really have much we want to do in our hand. But again, just take some attacks. And again, now if Mimeoplasm gets getting rid of, we're still trying to get other creatures right in our graveyard for them to deal with. So the next turn, now we could honestly just sorry, I want to mill 3 and get it back. I was gonna say we could just hardcast Toxrill at this point, and I think we just have a great board state for our opponents to deal with. Because they've still got to deal with the massive Mimeoplasm. They still have to deal with this, which isn't a bad attacker, and now Toxrill's adding. So now the problem is you need the board wipe. You can't just get rid of the Mimeoplasm. And I think that's the goal of what I'm trying to do with the deck is trying to create a board state with multiple threats. That's not just the Mimeoplasm sitting there as the thing that you want to remove. But let me know, what do you think of the Mimeoplasm down in the comment section below? And I'll admit I didn't expect to enjoy this or the new one very much when I first went into it. Just personally, like I didn't think it'd be a deck I'd be interested in. But I'll admit I was a little bit more interested in than I thought I was going to be. That doesn't mean that I'm going to go, proxy and test it tomorrow or anything like that. But I think they're really interesting decks, and I think you really get to find what you want from what you're copying, and I think that's really cool. That you get to kind of craft your deck how you want it to be as far as the things you want to play, and of course, any deck I can play things like Coma, and I'm just very happy to do. But let me know what you think, and I will catch you on the next one.